What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we are going to talk about 6 different ways that you can mic an acoustic guitar specifically for recording. Now, these are methods that I personally have used on records, as well as when I've gone in and done studio work for someone, had other engineers or producers use these techniques to mic me playing acoustic guitar. So I would consider these some tried and true methods that you can use. They each have different applications, and we're going to talk about that after we give them all a listen. A couple of things before we start. Number one, when you think about a microphone, think about it like an ear. Wherever you put that ear is what it's going to hear. Meaning, if you put your ear 4 inches away from the neck of a guitar, you're going to hear what's happening right at that neck of the guitar. If you put that ear 6 feet away from the guitar, you're going to hear the guitar, but you're also going to hear it reflect on the room and everything else that it has to hear, right? That sound source is not going to be as overwhelming as it would be if it were 4 inches away from your ear. So keep that in mind as we move this microphone all over the place. We're using that ear to get a different perspective of the guitar and therefore a different sound of the guitar everywhere we put it. The second thing is that we have 3 mono miking techniques, and then we have 3 stereo miking techniques. For those of you who are unfamiliar with those terms, mono in the case of microphones just means that there's one microphone. There's one ear picking up that audio source. Once we transition over into a stereo field, we're now dealing with 2 microphones. And so you'll see that there are 2 microphones set up pointed at different directions on the guitar, and therefore their combined signal is going to create a different sound than just that one mono source. Now, each one of these examples has not been EQ'd. There is some slight compression on them, as well as their gain staging has been adjusted so that the overall input and consequently output levels are as close as they could be so that you can really hear what the pros and cons are of each of these miking techniques. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. There's going to be 3 different acoustic guitar riffs played, and we will switch between each of the 6 different microphone positions. Afterwards, we'll go ahead and talk through them and talk about what the pros, cons, and applications of each of these miking techniques might be. Hope you enjoy. All right, so that was kind of a lot. First things first, each one of those sections is chaptered and marked. So if you ever want to refer back to a specific sound, you can always just find it on the section below and click through each different segment to listen again. Now let's go through the different types of miking techniques, how to do them, and kind of some of their pros and cons. The first technique is a mono technique, and is where you take a microphone and point it at the 12th fret on the neck of the guitar. It's usually about 6 to 12 inches away from the neck of the guitar. And this is honestly a bread and butter technique. This is a foundation that I probably use in, I would say, 70 to 90% of the sessions that I do. Everyone knows this sound, everyone loves this sound, everyone uses this sound, and this is why. It's because across all of the different types of styles that I played in earlier, it all sounds good. It's a very workable foundation. You can EQ it how you need it, you can stick it in the back with some reverb, or you can bring it up front and it really shines no matter where it is. If you are new to miking guitars, this is where you want to start. Get used to this, get comfortable with this. I promise it has never failed me and it won't fail you. The only con, and this is pushing it to say that this has a con, could be that there's not enough bass in it, but unless you're doing just a solo acoustic thing, you shouldn't really need that much bass anyway, and we're going to talk about how to work around not having enough bass a little bit later. The second miking technique is what we call the bridge miking technique. It's fairly similar to the 12th fret, but instead of pointing at the 12th fret on the neck, we're going to point at the bridge of our guitar, still about 6 to 12 inches away. This one has a lot of round low end to it, and if you notice, it kind of sounded terrible on its own, except for on finger picking. And that's really the only time that I've seen it work on its own as a mono signal, is if you want to take a finger picking section and make it sound kind of thuddy, round, and bassy. Other than that, it's really more of an additive miking technique to add to other microphone techniques to make it so it's more of adding information rather than shining on its own. In short, the pros are a nice thuddy, warm sound that can mix well with pretty much every other type of miking technique on this, and if you needed to bring low end forward, you could always use that. But on its own, it doesn't sound too great. Now, a quick note before we move into the next few miking techniques. What's happening now is we're moving the microphone further away from the guitar, further away from the source of the sound, which means that you have to increase the gain on that microphone, which means what we call our noise floor is going to increase. This doesn't really matter for a lot of the louder strumming parts, but on the softer things, you start to hear more of that noise, and it's because you're now not just capturing a really, really close signal of the guitar. You're now capturing the guitar and maybe the floor, if we're talking about the ear position. It's now capturing the guitar and the walls behind the player. We're going to start hearing more things the further away from the guitar we place the microphone. So this next one is called the ear placement. And if you notice, the microphone was right here, right by my ear, pointed down at the guitar. The thought process behind this miking technique is that we're essentially adding a microphone by the player's ear, which means the microphone is picking up what the player is hearing and therefore what they believe they're playing. In theory, it should be the truest to how the player feels they sound. What you'll notice from these is that regardless of which style it was, it had a lot of the shimmery high end to it. And anytime I used a pick, it felt like the pick was really forward in the signal. This could be really good in some instances and really rough in other instances. Sometimes where you might want to use this technique is probably when you're playing a really heavy open strumming part with a lot of open strings or open chords, and you're planning on tucking that guitar away into the mix. That way you're really getting that picky percussive element that you might need as a rhythmic aspect of the full band without getting a lot of the low end muddiness that can mix up with everything else. In short, the pros of this are that it's a pretty good way to get a strumming acoustic guitar sound that can be mixed and added well into a full band context. The cons are that on its own, it doesn't sound that great. It has a lot of picking in it and a lot of high end in it, which, unless we're talking about a full band situation, is probably not what you want if the piece that you're working on is guitar forward. The other con is that if you are miking someone who has headphones on and they have a metronome running or another track running in that headphone, if it's too loud in their ears, then that mic is sitting right there and can pick up that metronome coming from the headphones. And so there's a bleed issue there as well. Once again, like the bridge technique, it's a great additive, but I don't know that it's the position that I go to every single time when I want a great guitar sound. Now that we're moving into the stereo section, one thing that I want you to pay attention to is kind of what we've already talked about how the noise floor is a little louder because the microphones are further away from the guitar. That also means that you're going to start to hear more of the room, which I have a treated room. I have these sound panels behind me, so it's not as bad. But if you were to put this in the context of like a normal living room or small bedroom that's untreated, a lot of times you'll hear the reflections off of all the walls in these stereo fields, and it can add a lot of weird sounds and things to your signal that, unless you know how to work with them, probably aren't what you're looking for. And even still, in an untreated room, it's just not going to get you a very good sound. Luckily, my room is fairly treated. It's not perfect, but I can get a little bit of distance between me and the microphones. In a well-treated room or a nice big high-ceilinged room, you can get a lot of really beautiful sounds because now you're starting to hear the player reflected in the room, and it gives a lot of great context to where you recorded, especially for live recordings. You can actually hear what it sounded like in the room when they were playing it. And also a note that because each of these techniques is a left-right technique, the signals are panned to the left side and the right side. This could make it feel a lot fuller than all the mono signals, but again, that's a specific purpose. You wouldn't want a really full acoustic guitar if it's competing with bass, drums, two more electric guitars, some keys, and that sort of thing. Instead, you'd probably opt for a mono signal. But if you were doing something where it's just guitar and vocals, or even just guitar, then you're probably going to want to look at one of these techniques because it will provide some fullness and some context. So the fourth technique that we looked at is called spaced pair. This is one of my favorite techniques. In my opinion, it makes it feel like you're hearing the guitar as if you were sitting in front of the player listening to them. You hear a little bit of the room, but also it's a little bit more focused in on the guitar. This technique can, however, cause some problems. It can cause what we call phasing issues, which occurs when the sound waves picked up by each of the microphones cancel each other out. So there's a rule that we use, which is called the 3-to-1 rule. It essentially means if the guitars are placed 1 foot in front of the player, then they need to be 3 feet apart. You obviously multiply that as you go further on. So if the mics are 3 feet in front of the player, then they need to be 9 feet apart, and you get into a much bigger field and stereo sound. And again, if you have a treated room, it sounds really awesome. But if not, maybe keep it a little bit closer. So quick recap, the pros to this are that it sounds like you're sitting in front of the player. It gives a very natural sound, and if you have a well-treated room, you hear more of the room, and it sounds really, really nice. Some cons, though, are that it's a little tricky to get right with that 3-to-1 rule and phasing issues. Now, you can always throw a phase inverter on it, but that's not always a tried and true method that you want to rely on. It's much better to mic it right than try to rely on stuff that's in the box later. The fifth miking technique that we're going to talk about is called an XY pattern. As you can see, it's when you take the two capsules of the microphones, you lay them on top of each other, and what happens is their fields that they pick up in kind of overlap each other and give you a really broad perspective on the room. You notice that there's a lot of noise in this one because it's gathering a lot more of the room. This is a technique that I honestly find I use more when I'm miking maybe a couple guitarists or an acoustic set or something like that. However, it can be useful for solo acoustic guitar in a well-treated room. You're probably noticing a theme here that the further away from the guitar we get, the more we want to make sure that our environment is well controlled. It also means that we're using it more as a choice to gain context and to gain a specific sound rather than provide a sound that we can then work with and mold to our choosing. That's a little bit more of the 12th fret. So pros to this one, gets a great room sound, really broad and really simple miking technique. You just lay them on top of each other, you're good to go. But it can give too much of the room in a context where you don't have a treated room, or if it's just one player, sometimes it can make the player sound a little bit smaller. Anyway, it's just a different technique. Lastly, this is what I refer to as the old standby. This is probably an industry standard technique that I think I use every single time, especially as a failsafe. What it is it's when you take two mics and you record the 12th fret and the bridge. And what you find is that it gives you kind of everything you really need. If you need bass, you have more bass coming from the bridge. If you need more clarity, you can pull it out of the 12th fret. It's a very safe miking technique. If it's too muddy and too full, you can literally just not even use the bridge mic. It's really the safe option. It's the way where you can get the most usable signal. There's not a high noise floor. There's not a lot of room noise. It's just guitar, nice and up close. You can split it and pan it so that it sounds really nice, or you can keep them fairly mono. It's really a very malleable, workable sound. If you're new to miking guitars, this is probably the best one for you. So once again, pros, it's easy to do, it's reliable, and it's workable. Cons, I don't really have any. I don't know, maybe it's too easy. We can say that. So I hope this was helpful to you. For those of you who are new to this, which of these do you want to try? For those of you that are veterans, which of these do you like? Are there other miking techniques that you like more than these techniques? Let me know in the comments down below. Once again, my name is Mac Wright. Thank you so much for joining. Please like and subscribe. It makes my day better. If nothing else, go make someone else's day better. Thank you so much. We'll see you around.